everyone, and welcome to the first extra episode for the visual novel series. Now we're going to be adding on some extra features that'll be going along with what we've created for this entire project so far. We've already got everything from the start to the finish for our visual novel, so you could make whatever you want now, but we're going to take it a step further and start building some extra things and just some more things that might be interesting or beneficial to your project as a whole. So in this episode, we're going to be building a little censor system for player input. We don't want the players putting in something nasty, do we? So let's go ahead and make sure that we load up our visual novel scene and unload our main menu scene. Again, if you do not have these, you can simply drag the scene into this hierarchy and then have your secondary screen open. Now, we've got this set up specifically for our game project, but for testing purposes, I'm going to go ahead and disable the visual novel manager, and I'm going to create an empty called testing. In my testing scripts, I've gone ahead and made a new C# script like we've done before called test run file, and I'll just attach it there. All this file does is check for a file, load that file, which whenever I load the file, I'm going to read the lines from the text asset, convert it to a conversation, and feed that into the dialogue system. I've also encapsulated all of this within the testing namespace. And since we're at a point where we have the application and we'll be exporting at any given time, I'm going ahead and encapsulating this one inside of a condition called ifUnityEditor, so this code will only be compiled if we are inside of the editor and not when we're exporting to the application. It'll make testing pretty easy and convenient. Now, as for the script that we're going to use, we're going to make a censor manager, but this is not going to be any part of the core scripts. It's not necessary for the engine, and not really an extension either, so I'm just going to create a new folder, and this is going to be called features. So any new features that I create, which could be optional to the engine, they'll go right inside of here. And now let me go ahead and create a new C# script called censor manager, which will handle all of our bad word filtering. Now, for our censor manager, there's going to be a particular list of words that we want to make sure no one uses. This is particularly useful if you were doing anything like a chat system. Of course, you might use your own plugin for that, but this, as an example, is going to be a censor manager that will evaluate any string that's given to it and look for any list of bad words that are in it, including patterns that represent bad words. So you know how people online try to get away with stuff by swapping an A for an @ symbol or an S for a dollar symbol? That's the concept that I'm applying here. We'll be looking for words or patterns or both, and then substituting those for little asterisk characters to make sure that it all gets blocked out. Okay, so let's go ahead and start by removing, well actually I'm going to keep start because we'll use that as, no we won't, I'll use the testing script for that. So let's go ahead and remove start and update. Censor manager does not need to be a mono behavior, it's all going to be static. So let's go ahead and get to work. So let's go ahead and start by defining the dictionary that's going to contain the bad words that we want to censor out. So that was my phone, by the way. That was not me. So private dictionary, and I'm just going to make this a dictionary so I can map a name to a pattern and make it easy to identify the words that I'm listing out here. So we'll have string, and we'll have a string, and this will just be the bad words. This will be a new dictionary. And I am going to make this static because everything in Censor Manager is going to be static. So the first word, I'm not actually going to use a bad word just because of the audience. I do not want to put that stuff out there. Granted, it's 2023, everyone's been exposed, but that does not make it right nonetheless. Granted, no little kids should not be using vulgar language. I still firmly believe that. Neither should adults for that matter, but, you know, it is the world we live in. Now, let's say that we want to just make sure no one puts in bad word 1. So, bad word 1 is what I'm going to call this. And the pattern that's going to be associated with bad word 1 is going to be a regex pattern. So, I'm going to start with B. And with it being regex, we can use any of the regex identifiers and keys. So the next letter is A, but I want to also include the substitution letters, which would be inside of brackets, which means one or the other. It's going to be either A, the @ symbol, and sometimes people use for as well. So BA, DW, and then O or 0, RD, so that's bad word, and then 1. So that's one word we can look for. And let's go ahead and add another one. Let's say I really don't want anyone using the word stinking. So I'm going to add stinking in here. And then let's go ahead and define this pattern. So again, in brackets, we have S, and we've also got the $sign. People may use 5. I'm not going to even worry about that. T, and then the I, which would be either I or 1. And then NK, followed by I or 1 again, and NG. And so what that would do is it would match stinking, it would match ST1, NK1, NG, and it would match basically all of the variants that you could have with that. But anyway, that's going to evaluate the pattern and make sure that nothing matches it, even if someone's trying to be clever. Okay, so we'll stick with that for now. And now let's go ahead and implement the function that's going to allow us to center the text. So this is going to be a public static function. It's going to return a Boolean to let us know if the text was censored or not. And we'll simply call it censor. What censor is going to do is I'm going to go ahead and reference a string, which will be the text that I want to censor. And by referencing it, I'll have direct access to the variable and not just the value of the variable. So if I change text, it's going to change it at the source. So if I pass in a string to it, then I'm going to be changing that very string, which would then be fed onto anything else without having to return it. So censor will go ahead and do that. Now let's go ahead and cache a Boolean here for is censored. This will be our return value, and by default, it's going to be false. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to loop through this dictionary for each of the values, which is our patterns, and see if they are present inside of the string. So let's go ahead and start a for each loop. Inside of this for each loop, let's go ahead and grab the pair of the bad word patterns. So I'll go ahead and say that we're going to do a var and just grab each pair for our key value pair in the bad words. So we've got our key, which is the title, and the pattern. Now let's check if it exists. Let's go ahead and search for the pattern as an individual word. In order to do that, let's go ahead and define a subpattern here, which is going to equal our pattern sandwiched between two keys used by regex to identify the start and end of a word. That's going to be the \b. But we're going to have to escape the backslash just so everything works right. And then on that, we'll go ahead and add the pair.value because that's our key. And then we will go ahead and add in the end of the word identifier. Or you can combine that into one string and just inject the pair of values inside of the brackets. So we've got our value as a standalone word. Now let's go ahead and get a regex instance to see if we can identify a match. So let's define a new regex instance here, equal new regex, and we're going to search it by the pattern, and we're also going to make sure that it's not case sensitive. So let's go ahead and say regex options dot ignore case. If you wanted to, you've got other options you can use here as well, such as ignoring white space as well if you want to be extreme with it. And multi-line too. A lot of different things you can do. But I'm just going to go ahead with our standard ignore case, and then let's go ahead and check if we got a match. So if regex dot is match, we're going to check it against the text that we have. If it is, then we need to inject it. So we'll go ahead and say that is censored equals true because there is a bad word in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to replace text. So text is now going to equal regex.replace. And we're going to replace the text with a certain value. So we're going to pass in a lambda expression that will create a string for each one of these matches that we find. So let's pass in our match as the match, and let's generate a new string. Now, what's going to compose this string is going to be an asterisk symbol. And just because I want to substitute our words with asterisks. And we're going to have as many asterisks as there are in our match.length. So however many, let's try that again. However many letters there are, we're going to have that many asterisks to replace them. Okay, cool. So I've created a new script called test censor, which we're going to use just for testing our sensor manager, and attached it to the testing object. Inside of here, we're in the namespace, and, let me fix that. If Unity editor, there we go, right there, that one. So if Unity editor will compile it. So let me go ahead and make a void called check, which is going to take in a string with a line. And this is going to be the line that we'll be checking. So it's as easy as passing in our lines to this function and throwing them to the sensor manager and seeing if it captures anything. So let's go to pass in a couple lines. I'm going to check just 3 lines here. 2 of them are going to be bad, and 1 of them is going to be just fine. So this line has a bad word 1 in it, because that is the bad word that I chose first. Now the second line I want to check is this should be clear of any bad words. That line should be fine. And the other word that I didn't want it to show is stinking. So this one N-K-I-N-G. So I got capital cases, I've got a 1 substituting the I. I'm also going to change the S to a $sign, but that still composes the same word. So this stinking line should be bad as well. So how do we know if it's bad? Easy enough. We'll just go ahead and say if sensor manager.censor, and I'm going to reference the line that's been passed in, so it's going to change it in real time. If that's true, debug.log, and I'm going to log a new message showing that this line is bad. So I'm just going to start off with the color equals red using rich text formatting. And then inside of little quotes, I'm going to add the line. Now, if it did not censor it, then I'll go ahead and print that line out, but it will be green. And so if we run that in Unity, we can see that we have the first line get checked, and it does indeed replace bad word with the asterisks. Second line is good, but it thinks the third line is good too. And that should be false. So let me just verify how I set up that pattern. And that's due in part to 2 things. First off, I need to escape this $sign because that's actually a key in regex. So 2 backslashes and it will identify this as a character now. Secondly, apparently regex does not like the /b when it precedes the $sign. Maybe there's some special rule there I'm not familiar with, but essentially what I had to do is declare a positive look behind and look ahead to make sure that there's no word character before or after the value that we're looking for. So at the very start, what we have is parentheses, question mark, less than sign, equals, / W, and then the vertical brace and the up arrow. So that is representing no word character at the start of this word, and then basically the same thing, just ending with a $sign at the end, saying there's no word character after this, meaning this is an isolated word. And doing it like that, it actually works. And you can see we do indeed get it happening. So these 2 lines are now triggered as being censored and the bad word has been taken out. Now, let's say we've got a particularly bad word that I don't want being shown at all, no matter how anyone tries to do it, whether they pair it with another word or not. Such as, if I write stinking here, it's going to evaluate that and censor the line. But if I instead precede stinking with A, so this is a stinking line, then it does not match the case because it's not a word isolated by itself. I've now tacked on something else. But you could easily get past a censor just by tacking something on to the beginning of it, which means we'd not only want to evaluate if words are there isolated by themselves, but also we want to hard block specific words from being present at all. In order for us to do that, this is basically going to require two dictionaries. The first dictionary will contain the bad words where we want them to only be blocked if they're isolated and used as just this word itself. Whereas the second one is going to be a hard block list, and this blocks the words or the patterns no matter where they are, if anything's preceding it or after it. This is for being really strict on your censoring. So private static dictionary, and let's make it another string called hard blocks, and equal new dictionary string. We'll go ahead and populate this with just one. Let's say that no matter what is going on, I don't want anyone for any reason to talk about tofu. Now me personally, I enjoy a good bowl of miso soup, but in this instance, we are not allowing that in our game. So I'm looking for T and O or 0, followed by F and U. So that's in my hard block list. So inside of Censor, we're just going to run another for each loop here. So for each, and we'll make this var pair in hard blocks. So first we're going to check for anything that should be removed very strictly, and then we'll check for all of the other ones and remove them in their isolated conditions. So let's go ahead and just say, let's just build the regex. We don't actually need to do anything with the value, like pair it with an isolator like we did here. We're just going to look for the value itself. So we can skip writing a pattern and just go ahead and make the regex. So regex equals new regex, and we're going to look for the pair.value and regex options.ignore case, so we're not case sensitive. And let's go ahead and check. If regex.isMatch against the text that we're looking at, then we're going to go ahead and say is censored equals true because we found something. And let's do the same thing we did down at the bottom. Let's go ahead and say that text is now going to equal a regex dot replace, and we're going to replace from the text. Let's get whatever match we've found, and let's go ahead and implement a new string, which is going to consist of my asterisk, and it's going to be as long as the match.length. Okay, so that will find it wherever it's at. So then I should be able to go ahead and say check, and just check for tofu. So I'm going to say I want some tofu in a warm bowl of miso soup. Don't forget the extra tofu. And so tofu and extra are in the same word. So if that was in the regular list, it sure wouldn't trigger. But in this other hard block list, it should see that and get rid of it immediately. And here we are. If we look down at the bottom, we can see that it blocked the isolated instance of tofu, but also removed it from that last line, that last part, where we have extra tofu as one word. It went ahead and removed it because we set it to just get rid of tofu no matter what. Now let's say if I wanted to incorporate this into the input panel where the player is going to be inputting their text, then this would be a fine spot for it. Now, this would mean that this is no longer an optional feature, and we'll be incorporating this into a requirement because it'll be part of the input panel. But if we come down to, just as an example, onAccept input. If I were to go ahead and take a look at this function, as long as we have text in the input field when we hit the accept button, it's going to mark that as the last input, hide it, and the input is accepted. Well, let's go ahead and do a quick check first. So if censor manager.censor, I'm going to look for the input field.text. Well, I'll actually cache that in a variable first. So string input equals input field.text. That way I'm not messing with the input field directly. So we're going to censor the input, and don't forget to make sure it's referenced. So if we've censored it, then we know we can't accept it. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and accept the input and hide the input panel. But if this happens, then I want to bring up a menu saying we can't use that. So I can make use of our UI confirmation menu, say UI confirmation menu.instance.show, and I'm going to show something saying your input was not accepted due to a profanity filter. Please try again. And if that shows up, I'm going to say a new confirmation menu button, and I'm just going to have a single title. So the title will be okay, and it will perform no action and just close it out. Actually, what it will do is I will have an action associated to it. That action is going to clear the input field. So input field dot text equals nothing. Now I've created a text file called Censor Testing, which has the narrator ask what my name is, and we will open up the input panel and ask for the name, and then just show the name of the character. And testing, test run file is going to load up that censor testing file. So let's go ahead and start it up and make sure that the censor manager is working. So what's my name? Here it comes. Okay, so now I'm going to say tofu and accept. Okay, your input was not accepted due to a profanity filter. Please try again. Hit OK, and the input field is cleared. That's just an example of how we can make this work. So with that implemented, you've got a censor manager that you can use for the visual novel or for any kind of chat system that you might be using. You have to be familiar with regex in order to make the most of this, but this is a pretty good setup for your basic censor manager system. So with that out of the way, that's all for this episode, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.